Thank you very much indeed, Lord Offord and colleagues. Thank you for bearing with us as we work through a very long day. Thank you for your patience and your interest. I'm Nick Bridge, as Lord Offord says, the Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change. And the UK was the first country a couple of decades ago to decide that climate change and environmental issues were fundamental foreign security policy issues, and to establish a special representative and a whole network of diplomats around the world, now numbering several hundred, that the UK has working every day to try and tackle these issues. So that work goes on. I thought the most useful thing I could perhaps offer just in a few minutes was to report back to you in the region that is seeing the impacts most clearly, most urgently, as we've been hearing all day, report back to you around some of the work we've been doing on tackling the causes. And the causes, of course, are happening elsewhere in the world through the emissions of greenhouse gases. And the primary diplomatic mechanism we've been using in recent months, of course, was our presidency of COP26 in Glasgow and the achievement of the Glasgow Climate Pact. Just a headline thought about, these COPs can be very challenging, frustrating, and nobody quite gets as much as they want, and there's always more that we need to do. There's always so much more. But if we look at the challenges in the world and the geopolitics, at Glasgow last year, and what an incredible venue that was to host a COP, we got every party to the United Nations Convention, every single party, to agree every single word of a very, very ambitious and significant document, and to move forward with climate action. So for those of you who are desperate to see more action from governments around the world, I hope that COP26 did as much as it could. Let me just maybe highlight three big areas of progress that I think make a material difference to our efforts. The first is this whole concept of net zero. Now, when we became COP presidents, or just a year before, there was almost nobody in the world with this commitment to stop their contribution to climate change. And by the end of Glasgow, we had 90% of the world economy, the world leaders, signed up to net zero, 90%. So that was a huge political shift, building on the extraordinary Paris Agreement of 5 years previously. And it was detailed in nationally determined contributions, NDCs, by every party to the convention. So every country was saying, we agreed at Paris to tackle this problem, we agreed to end our contribution to climate change, and this is how we're going to do it. Now, the problem coming out of Paris was that those contributions still added up to more than 3 degrees of warming, utterly catastrophic forecasts. But by the end of Glasgow, the increased commitments that we got took us down to, depending how you measure it, just a little over 2 degrees. Now that is still too much, but it was a huge shift in the trajectory of global warming. Now, of course, the net zero and the NDC commitments by countries mean nothing if they're not implemented. Real world change in buildings, in industry, in cars, in trains, in how we travel. We've all flown, many of us have flown here. Can we all commit that that journey and those emissions, the emissions I've just created, am I able to say that this journey was worth it? Am I making the connections? Am I making the difference in this visit to this great country to justify the flight? Are all of you justifying your flights? So I think we really have to take this down to the real economy, the real financial system, and say, are we making a difference? The second big area was around adaptation and resilience. The impacts are already enormous and growing exponentially in some places. And we managed to have a huge increase in the finance that we put into countries that are suffering the most, the poorest and most vulnerable communities. But there is so much more that needs to be done. So adaptation and resilience has become now, through Glasgow, a great big new focus, in addition to reducing emissions, to dealing with the consequences of the emissions that we haven't managed to curtail. And then the third area that I want to talk about is justice. And we gave new and significant platforms at Glasgow to indigenous peoples to talk about land rights, to talk about how we actually transform how we steward our oceans and our forests. And to give you an example, on the first day when we had most of the world's leaders at Glasgow, we had to focus on one really big announcement that would really make a difference, and we went for forests, that we renewed our commitment to halt and restore the deforestation of the world's forests, and every world leader there signed up to that declaration. So there's a huge amount that we need to do now to deliver all those commitments, the net zero commitments, the adaptation resilience and the finance, and then the work so that all peoples feel the justice that we need to achieve out of this agenda. So thank you for your time. I hope that gives you a sense that things are moving. It's not enough, but it's a lot. And we all now need to pull together and turn those political commitments into real economy and real societal change. And the great thing, finally, President, is as an economist, I can tell you, it not only makes environmental sense, it's not only a climate and environmental emergency, but the economics of clean is extraordinarily powerful. Clean wind in the UK is now 9 times cheaper than gas. So let's do it and let's press forward. And the UK is right there in ensuring that we can limit these impacts in this region. Thank you.
Well, thank you.